I've done a pretty good job creating more formative assessments and work that students can take their time with at home. But in the age of AI, this setup is producing students who pass my class but are not at all ready for the next course, and they are failing and they are not being successful. And in this episode, we're going to talk about what you can do about this if you're in a similar situation. Welcome everyone to Math in Higher Ed with Jason Barnett. We're going to start with a quick scope outline of what this episode's about. I'm going to be talking about hybrid and face-to-face classrooms for this episode. Fully online classes, I really don't think there's that much you can do, but we're going to be talking about when we have some time with our students. I want to start with like a little bit of a brief history of assessments. So if you go back to the 18th century, there was a lot of oral recitations of math. There was a lot of rote learning, like, recite your times tables and stuff like that. A big oral tradition in the 19th century. And then in the 20th century, tests became big. Written examinations became really big starting from the early 20th century. And they were really big for a long time. In fact, they're still really big 10 years ago, still really big in a lot of places right now. But I think in the 21st century is where education really started turning away from like a lot of written examinations. We realized that more formative assessment was more beneficial. We realized that take-home work or projects or homework are all more valuable, and or oral exams. We kind of went back a little bit. There's a lot of things that we talked about, but interestingly enough, in the age of AI, a lot of us are feeling forced in some sense to go back to written tests and quizzes, which again, we all were like, well, this is not the best way to test students, but at least, we're getting some measure of student understanding instead of just getting answers generated by AI. And this episode is not about cheating, actually. I think a lot of times when we talk about AI, we think about students like using it sneakily, or they're like, they're doing something bad, or like they're trying to cheat, or they don't think it matters. This episode is not about cheating. This episode is really about the fact that a lot of well-intentioned students are using AI on take-home work, and they're getting scores that is not reflecting their understanding. Again, certainly a lot of cheating is happening. Certainly cheating is a lot easier right now. That is much harder to change. This episode is really about, hey, what can we kind of do so that our assessments are going to reflect the actual understanding of our students, whether they're well-intentioned or not well-intentioned. So we're going to start with kind of a bit of an elephant in the room of some sort of perceived hypocrisy problem. And that's the idea that students resent when professors use AI, because professors are saying don't use AI, and then a lot of professors are using AI themselves, and this seems very hypocritical. And there's a lot of merit to what students are saying, right? They're paying for an education from a human. They don't really want to be taught by a machine. That makes a lot of sense. The students should be using AI, right? They're going to have to need it. They're going to need it for their job, so they need to know how to use it. So they should be using it in some sense. And a lot of professors do react very poorly to AI use. A lot of professors are somewhat hypocritical. A lot of professors overreact. A lot of professors are very angry about AI. So I get a lot of where this student energy comes from. And this ties into the idea that, as a quick callback to episode 4 of this podcast, that we need to really be modeling good AI use for our students. If we're using AI poorly, that is the worst look for us and the worst for our students. So I said perceived hypocrisy problem. I said there's a lot of things that students are correct to be upset about or frustrated about. But I think what my conversations with students have led to is that I think some of them are really missing some key points, right? Is that you are taking a class to learn the material in some sense, and we might disagree about what kind of sense that is. And AI should be used. I do believe AI should be used in the classroom. I do think that AI should enhance learning, but I also think that AI should not circumvent learning. If you just use AI to generate answers to a problem, you're not learning. And I think if you think you don't need to learn and you can just have AI generate the answers, and if we're like going towards that future of nobody needs to understand or learn anything and we'll all just use AI to solve all of our problems, I think that's a very dark future. And who knows, maybe that's the future we are going to, but I choose to believe otherwise. I choose to believe that we're not going towards that future, and there is value in learning, and that we as a society need to continue to have understanding of our own things. And like another thing that some students are missing, in addition to the fact that, right, you still should be learning things, and it's like, you know, as professors, we use AI as part of our job, some of us, but you know, we're using it to help students learn. And when you're an expert on something, it's much easier to know how to use something correctly, how to use something for learning, how to use something for teaching. But many of our students are still learning a lot of these things, and not to be condescending to our students, but they are learning from us. And so, you know, there's some level of knowledge that we have. And there's a really, really big problem with student AI use is that AI is just so tempting. Like, it's such a slippery slope of like, oh yeah, I understand this well enough, I'll just use AI to finish the homework. I am short on time today. Or, you know, like, oh yeah, I'll use AI to explain the answer to me. Oh yeah, that makes sense. I'll just copy that down. I got other things to do. Or I'm just tired today. And again, like, a lot of them have very good intentions with all of this stuff. And I truly choose to believe that my students are not generally like very like ill-intentioned. Sure, some of them are, but many of them like are trying. But that's why it's such a difficult thing, is that AI is very hard to do correctly for learning. And so, like, you know, to start with this kind of elephant in the room of like, you know, is there some level of hypocrisy here? I would say that no. I mean, there is some from some professors, but I don't think there's an inherent hypocrisy of professors using AI and telling students that they really can't use that much AI. And really what I'd suggest is that there is kind of an ideal AI inclusive classroom where you have explicit assignments in your you know, homework or in class activities or something like that, specific AI use assignments of like how to use AI correctly, and like telling students, oh, use AI to do this, and like teach people how to use AI. Again, that's like episode 5 of this podcast. And then also have like things that are explicitly, you should absolutely not be using a single piece of AI for this. We should be modeling both parts of that. In an ideal world, I don't do a great job of doing the AI piece of that, but I think that's something that could be good. Okay, so that's kind of like starting off with just, you know, that sort of disclaimer, you know, important thing that we have to talk about that students always wonder about. But what can we do? Going back to the overarching problem of, you know, a lot of well-intentioned students are using AI on take-home assignments, projects, take-home quizzes, homework assignments, and they're just getting scores that don't reflect their understanding. I don't think the answer is going back to quizzes and exams being in person 100% of your grade. I don't think that's the answer, although it does solve the AI problem here of, but I think it creates worse problems, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So what can we do? And I think the answer for a lot of us who have some in-person time with our students is there are a lot of in-person things that we can do with students to really assess them more effectively. And again, see the previous episodes for like how to get students to be learning better on their own. But this is about assessment, this specific episode. So the first thing, I think the most exciting thing is to really, people are going back in time to written exams being so big again, but I think let's go back further in time. And I'm not saying you should have your students, you know, orally tell you their times tables, but I do think oral exams and things similar to oral exams can be extremely powerful. There's some ways to making it manageable. In the past, what I've done is I had students that say, all right, you have weekly quizzes. They're going to be written down, but once per quarter, you're going to do an oral quiz instead. And that was a pretty manageable way to get my foot in the door. Like, okay, so if I have a class of 30 people, I'm only doing 30 oral quizzes in this quarter. I can do that for one class. And that was a great way to learn, because I think oral exams are pretty intimidating and they are a huge time sink. I would say that they are the most valuable way of assessing students out there, because there's a natural segue of like, oh, I'm already having this one-on-one conversation with my student. I can ask about how things are going. If we all had students actually show up to office hours and ask questions and we get to know each other and be able to see where they're at, well, then they're going to do a lot better anyway. And oral exams and oral quizzes in general are a great way to get that started. So again, there are a lot of ways of making it more manageable, but oral exams are extremely effective. They are hard to scale if you have large classes. They are time consuming, but just start really, really small like I did. And I think that's a great way to open some doors if you're interested in that. Another thing to consider that I've worked through a little bit is having students record short video explanations and post them to Canvas. Like we all have, and this is something that you can do in a completely online class as well. Instead of having our discussion threads, where post your own post and then reply to someone else's post. I think doing something similar with video explanations is much more beneficial and powerful. I think it makes it harder to cheat. Certainly not that hard, but makes it a little harder. And I think it's a little helpful for students to maybe get a little bit better of a grasp of whether they understand something. Because if they're talking and then they're like, wait, I actually don't know how to do this, maybe that can clue them in. Because again, I'm really talking in this podcast episode about the well-intentioned students. I'm not trying to stop cheating. I don't think we can really do that very well as my primary goal. Anyway, I do want to stop cheating. We'll talk about that later too. And then again, you still have to watch the videos. You can change the replay on like Canvas, the replay speed on Canvas or YouTube, stuff like that. You can have them peer grade each other. I really like peer grading because it's very instructional as well. And like when they're using rubrics and grading each other, as well as it's just, I don't know, I feel like there's some level of, I can maybe cheat through my professor or use AI for my professor, but my students fellow students a lot of times are going to call me out on that. So I think a lot of times students are harsher with each other than we are with them, and we can kind of use that if we're worried about like too much AI use. Because a lot of students really hate AI and they just kind of think, we have to use it. And again, I will say that if you are doing like having students record videos or using peer grading, make sure you provide them very clear rubrics. And this is critical. You practice and demonstrate how to use them beforehand. So like you could put a fake student video on there, give students the rubric. You could do this in class, you could do this online, have something and give the students the rubrics and have them like talk to each other about how they would grade this fake assignment, and give them don't just throw them into something and give them a rubric. If you're going to do that, that can help a lot and shouldn't take too much time. I haven't done that yet, but I plan to. This little disclaimer. Something I'm also planning on piloting next quarter is instead of in-class quizzes for certain classes anyway. I don't know if this would work as well with lower level classes, but with certain classes, if you have like review time for quizzes, you could have students lead the review. Or maybe not lead the full review, but maybe lead a part of a review, or have students sign up, maybe they do 1 or 2 a quarter. Maybe they do it in groups, but sign up to do like a review problem for the class before the quiz. I think that's a great way for students to do it. Of course, it's very hard for a lot of students, and it's hard to grade, but it can be a valuable way, and like an oral quiz as well. And again, public speaking is very important. So helping students and providing them the tools to assist them with that, I think, is very valuable. But again, we then kind of do have to teach a little bit of it ourselves. Two other ideas is, for what can you do? And again, really your choices are mostly doing things in class. If you want to stop students from accidentally using AI to misrepresent their understanding, or even if they're intentionally using AI, you could also do a lot of individual or in-class group activities. This is a little hard for me sometimes because if I allow them to take it home, then of course they're going to use AI in some way. And when I say they, not all of them, of course, but many of them will use it to either check their answers, which is a lot of times fine by me, but find their mistakes or do the answers. And again, like if AI just tells them to fix something, how much are they really learning? So you kind of have to make them submit it in class. And if you do that, you have to really be cognizant about time restraints and have some ideas for the faster students, like having like optional challenge problems, or maybe if you don't finish all, like if you get through at least half of it, that's like 90% of the work. So it still gives something for the better students to achieve because they're going to want that 100%, stuff like that. But again, the value of group work in general is extraordinarily high in all classes, but I think especially math classes, having some level of group work is really powerful. To tie onto that, to kind of lower the barriers or the headache for a professor, is if you're willing to do some upfront work, you can have students submit things on My Open Math, so it's auto-graded, or Desmos activities, or Amplify, something like this. They take a little bit of work to set up, but they really do make the grading a lot easier. Because that's really a lot of the trouble I have for a lot of in-person stuff is, then I have even more to grade, which is always a big limiting factor. Which leads us directly into our next section of how do we do all of these things: oral quizzes, oral exams, have students upload videos, peer grading, in-class presentations, individual or group work, in-class activities, setting up auto-graded things. How do we do all of that sustainably? Because it is so much work. Okay, so here we'll start with a very ironic suggestion is, we're trying to manage AI's effect on authentic assessments. And one of the ways we can free up more bandwidth ourselves is leveraging AI ourselves. And so again, it's up to you whether you like this idea or not, but it is an idea of, there's a lot of grunt work that we do that is, I'm okay offloading to AI. Like first drafts of like problems, although I love writing my own problems, so I don't know how much I do this myself, but maybe I should. I spend a lot of time writing problems, creating rubrics. I think AI is pretty good at creating rubrics, or maybe I'm just really bad at creating rubrics. If you might want to use it for drafts of like feedback, so like you find yourself saying the same things over and over again. Maybe you even know beforehand what issues you're going to come across, having it like draft some stuff that you can edit instead of doing some stuff yourself. But again, I'm really hesitant about using AI for student communication myself, so you may not want to do that either. But those are some ideas. Like think of the work that doesn't really mean much. And again, grading is hard because on the one hand, grading feels really tedious and doesn't not meaning much, but on the other hand, giving that student feedback is so incredibly important. It is hard to find the balance. But if you can find a way that feels good for you to leverage AI to get rid of some of the busy work of our job to free up, like, again, all of those things that I mentioned as like in-class assessment options, that is some of the most meaningful things that we can do with our time. I cannot actually think of many things that would be more meaningful with my time as a professor than doing oral exams with my students, talking with them about math one-on-one. Again, it's not really sustainable to do it on a large scale, but these are some really good things that we can be doing with our students. So if we can offload less important things so that we can focus on more important things, that's a win for me. Some professors I've talked to have also talked about like setting up things like they use lockdown browsers, making sure that students can't use AI for the in-class stuff. I think that's a lot of effort for me, and it feels a little adversarial, and it's, a little hard to do, and they have phones. And another point, the last point I want to make about sustainability is, remember, you don't have to overhaul everything. You don't have to make everything foolproof. You don't have to do it all. Just think, what is a small shift that you could make that would make a positive change in your class? How can you add any of these assessments or modify any of these assessments in a way that is a more authentic way of judging students' knowledge? Because I think it is really kind of overwhelming and kind of a bit sad that there is so much, there's such a mismatch with a lot of at-home work that we give to our students and their actual understanding. And again, this isn't entirely new. Many students would have friends help them, or family members help them. I'm doing quotation marks with my hands. And I cannot tell you how many students I've had that, tell me that their tutors helped them with the assignment. It's like, no, I've talked with you about math. This tutor did your assignment. You did not do this unless you just magically forgot everything in 24 hours. And so, like, how do we do this? You're not going to do it all. You're not going to fix the problem in a day. But my challenge is just one quarter. Can you do one small thing? And again, last fall was the quarter where I was like, one class, each student will do one oral quiz, just so I can check it out. So think of some small way of doing that yourself. So that's the first closing thought for this podcast episode. The other thing, of course, as a big disclaimer, is I'm experimenting with all this myself, right? We're all dealing with a lot of these emerging AI issues ourselves. We're trying to figure things out. So I don't have all the answers. These are some of the things that have been going through my mind, which is why I created this podcast episode. Well, why I created the podcast in general is to kind of put my thoughts in order and to interact with other people who are going through the same things, and starting that discussion, I think, is very valuable. Another thing to remember is that we cannot prevent, and we have never been able to prevent, all academic dishonesty. I think we try too hard. I think it's going to punish a lot of honest students. So I tend to be a little bit more too much on the lax side, because I really don't want to punish the students who are trying legitimately. So we're never going to be able to stop it all. You find where you want to be in that balance, right? You want to be a little extra strict to make sure it doesn't go through, or do you want to be a little on the lax side and to make sure that the students who really want to learn are enabled to be learning, and your own sustainability as well? Because when we try to make everything proof, that's going to lead to burnout. That's not sustainable. And honestly, I don't think we should be responsible for all of our students' choices. So we set them up for success. We find that middle ground. So give yourself some grace and decide where you like to be in that. And yeah, that was kind of my next point too, of we don't want to let low effort AI use devalue the work of students who are genuinely trying, but we also don't want to design a course that's so locked down that it becomes adversarial. I hated taking classes or observing classes where the professor's trying so hard to stop students from cheating that they feel like a police officer breathing down my neck, or somebody who's fighting against me. And it's a lot of us are trying to learn. Don't let the few bad ones, it feels silly to say, but don't let a few ruin it for everyone. So again, we need to find that balance. And there's a lot of very scary things in this episode. So my absolute last, well, that's not true. There's always one more. My last big closing point is just a little perspective. We're teaching the students who want to be taught, and a ton of our students really want to learn. Some of them don't quite know how to do it the best way, but a ton of our students are really interested in learning. They want to learn. They may not care about math, but they like to do a good job. They want to do good. They want to learn. They want to make us proud a lot of times. We have so many genuine students. I don't want any of us to get too discouraged. I don't want any of us to forget that we are really making a difference for those students, and that we should be designing our course to help those students who want to be helped. And there's a lot of sad things out there and a lot of frustrating things out there, but there's a lot of good things out there too. So I think we shouldn't lose that. So that's basically it. Again, I have contact information in the podcast description. So shoot me your thoughts if you're curious about sharing, if you want to share something, or if you have thoughts about past episodes, current episodes, future episodes, things you want to see, people you want to hear from. I would love to hear your ideas on this. This one is really my most brainstorming episode. So if you have thoughts on what you're doing to make your assessments authentic representations of students' knowledge, I would love to hear that, because I don't want to just read a bunch of AI generated things. And I also don't want to just have students taking quizzes and tests to determine their whole grade. And I think we need to find something in the middle, and we're all figuring this out together. So let's work together. I want to hear your thoughts. And that's pretty much it for this episode. Thank you everyone for listening or watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day or night, wherever you are. Take it easy. Have a good one. Bye-bye.